Hello everyone, thank you for joining us for this discussion celebrating Mother's Day. My name's Zoe Pearson, I'm Head of Marketing for Asia and the Middle East for St James's Place, and I'm joined by my colleague and my friend, Eleanor Coleman. Eleanor is a seasoned financial professional. She's also mum of two boys, Ollie and Alex. And together we're going to talk you through the financial journey you can expect to go through as a parent, and we'll hope to empower you with a few hints, tips, skills and advice to see you through. So with that, let's kick off.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me, Zoe.
Very welcome. Tell us a little bit about your journey to become a mother, your journey as a mother, some of the dynamics in the Coleman household.
Well, so I moved to Hong Kong 19 years ago. So it's just been 19 years last weekend. And for the first 4 years I was here, I was single, working as a financial advisor. I then met my gorgeous husband and we went on a date 15 years ago. He's put up with me for a very long time. And after we got married, we decided to try and have kids almost immediately, actually. We knew that we would probably have some difficulty conceiving. That was not a massive shock. The length of time it took to actually have the kids was a lot more effort, a lot more money, and it was quite hard emotionally. But I had IVF, and we have two boys. So Ollie is 5 and Alex is 3. And we have a fairly chaotic life. I always thought I'd be the mum of beautifully behaved girls, and I am the mother of two feral boys whose lives basically revolve around Spider-Man, cuddling mummy, and rainbows. And long may that continue. They are, frankly, the best thing that's ever happened to us. And it's just a privilege to be in a position where I have those kids, because at one point it definitely didn't look like it was going to happen for us.
Obviously, as you know, we can completely empathise with that. My wife and I probably also knew fertility might be an issue. But yeah, and I think a lot of people out there listening probably have been through this process, and it's taken longer than they maybe imagined. And let's be honest, cost more than they imagined also.
Yeah, it's one of those things that you sort of say. So we decided to do some IVF, and we were sort of lulled into a false sense that it might work, because I did get pregnant naturally quite quickly. That one didn't stick, and it meant that we ended up doing 19 rounds before we then went on to sort of more drastic measures. But it meant that over a period of about 5-6 years, we probably spent close to $1 million Hong Kong dollars, which is a deposit of a house. It is the start of a retirement plan. It is a couple of years, it's 5 years worth of schooling. So when you look at the grand scheme of things, actually getting the children cost us a lot more than we would anticipate. Would I swap it? No. They're awesome kids, and we're very lucky to be in that position.
There is, of course, a tax subsidy now, which is quite new. I think it's this year or last year.
Yes, it's 2024-2025 tax year. So it's the tax year that's just ended on April 1st. There is 100 grand, which is pretty good. The average IVF cycle in Hong Kong ranges from about 80 grand in the public sort of private hospitals. So Queen Mary, which is where I did mine, and then it goes up to about 150 grand in some of the more exclusive private hospitals. So you're looking at the Sanatorium, the Aventis, any of those ones. It has to be done within that year, and any egg freezing that's done has to be done for, they generically say medical reasons, so conception reasons. So I think that they just want to keep that away from the people freezing their eggs because maybe they're getting to an age where they feel that it's necessary. And I believe there's different subsidies available for those freezing their eggs because of cancer treatments and things like that. So I think that's why they're there. It is, as a lot of things are worded very badly and quite clunkily in Hong Kong. But essentially, if you can prove that you spent that money on IVF and fertility treatment, you can get that taken off your tax bill, which is quite advanced for Hong Kong, considering we're quite archaic with a lot of the rules. You have to be married, you have to be heterosexual, you have to have all these different hoops to jump through.
I don't really want to talk about any of those bits, if I'm being honest.
Fair enough. But because we have to jump through all those hoops, it's nice to have some kind of incentive from the government to feel like it's not just us throwing money into the ether. There is some kind of support governmentally to feel a little bit like it's not just us by ourselves.
You mentioned IVF there and some of the journey that you and Sean had been through. There is a new tax subsidy.
There is.
Drop in the ocean perhaps, but it can help a little bit. How do you prepare for an expense like that you might not be expecting?
It's very hard to prepare for that kind of expense. We were saving sort of generically. We started saving as a couple when we got together. We started saving for our wedding, and so we continued that rate of saving. So it meant that when it came to IVF, we weren't starting from scratch essentially. The tax subsidies only come in this year, and so you can get up to 100,000 sort of taken off your tax bill or taken off your profits, so that you can get a lower tax percentage basically. I think it's really good to have that, because for a lot of couples it is quite a prohibitive expense. If the average IVF takes somewhere between $80,000 to $150,000, and the first one might not work, the second one might not work. I have friends who have done this multiple times, and those expenses add up very quickly. I would say that Sean and I probably spent the best part of $1 million having Ollie, and putting in the eggs in the freezer and going through all of those different stages. And I don't know whether we would have, I think it would have felt insurmountable had we not had savings, had we not had some family support, and had it not been over a 6-year period. If we'd have had to pay that up front, I think it would have been a hell of a shock to the system.
Absolutely. And I mean, even from our own experience, we had savings similar to you, we're in good habits, but even then
it goes quite quickly.
It goes quite quickly. Let's fast forward to today.
Yep.
How did you feel, and were there any sort of emotional challenges around money when the boys came into the world? How did that attitude towards money change for you?
Being a parent's really weird, actually. So when you leave hospital, they give you this perfect little child, and they kind of go, you are now its designated adult. And you don't have to pass an exam, you don't have to prove you're good at anything, you just get given this child. And children, much like Barbies, don't come with the accessories. So there's a lot of stuff you have to get children. And there are different levels. You can go, massively designer, or you can go for sort of bog standard stuff, and kids don't really care. So there are lots of different ways that financially bringing up children can be more or less expensive. But I do think that being financially responsible for a child made me take my job more seriously, work harder. At the time I was working part-time, and I went back to being full-time, and I'd taken a break during COVID and when I had the kids, and I came back to work with a renewed vigor, because not only was I working to have the life that I wanted and the life that I wanted for Sean and I was having the preparation to build that life I want for the kids, to be able to put them through the education I want them to be able to take them on the holidays I want to take them on, and to let them have the extracurricular things that I want them to experience. And if I want my children to have a very full life, I don't necessarily need to spend a huge amount of money, but I'd like to have the option. And so I don't want to feel like I'm curtailing any of their enthusiasm for sports or travel or anything else because of financial reasons. So it made me want to work harder. It made me want to take my job and my career more seriously. And financially, it basically decimates. I think it's one of those things that kids will expand to spend any money you have. So you have to be a lot more rigid when it comes to putting that money away and saying, this is away now. This cannot suddenly be spent on toys, sweets, fun things to do in the family. You have to sort of say, this is going to be the future money to spend on future fun stuff. And maybe we cut our cloth a little bit more now to make sure that when the kids are older and can go into all these exciting adventures, we have the funds to do it.
I've heard you speak so many times about financial freedom or financial empowerment. I know they're two of your favourite phrases.
Absolutely.
Just interesting to me, because it's obviously a switch where you've gone from thinking about, right, this is my financial empowerment, my financial freedom, to actually, this is our financial empowerment, this is our financial empowerment, almost to, it's their financial empowerment,
it is very different. Yeah. I think, Sean and I, when we met, we had nothing. And so we have obviously had a bit of lifestyle creep over the years. Yeah. We've gone from sharing a Subway sandwich as our third date to, brunches and, having the exciting life that you can in Hong Kong. And I would say that lifestyle creep does sort of make you suddenly spend a lot more money. But suddenly it's not just us. And I honestly think that Sean and I could probably live on very, very little. But we want our kids to be able to experience all the fun stuff that we want to have access to. And so it suddenly means that we're now planning a lot more further in the future. So rather than saying, let's plan for the next 3 or 4 years, we're now saying, well, in the next 20 years, what are our plans for these little people that we are in charge of? And how can we make their lives fun, exciting, engaging? How much is that going to cost? And how can we fund that easily, safely, and without having a detrimental effect on working too hard and not being able to spend time with them? It's a balancing act. The harder I work, the more money I have. The more money I have, the more I want to go and spend it on my kids, but I don't have time to do that because I'm working hard for the money. So there is essentially something that we need to balance there.
All of that in mind, how much does it honestly cost, do you think, to raise a child in Hong Kong?
How long is a piece of string? I mean, children kind of expand to take up all available cash and space, as far as I can tell. When Sean and I were living in a one-bedroom flat, we had less stuff, less expenses, and now it seems to be as much money as you can throw at them that you can do stuff with them. In general, it depends on what level of schooling you want. That's the obvious big expense. So both my children are at international schools. Both of them were in quite involved and high-level nursery schools. Because I was working, I wanted them to be fully engaged and have stuff to do. Also, because they're boys, they need to be walked like puppies to kind of get the energy out of them because they're crazy. I
think there's plenty of girls probably need that as well.
I don't know. It just, my kids are very energetic, I think is the nice way of putting that. Knackering. But essentially, we have chosen to put them in an international school. I think when you decide to have children with someone, that's a conversation that people don't usually have. We had that conversation probably because of my background in working in finance, but we knew where we wanted to send the kids to school. We knew what level of education we wanted. It helps that Sean and I had very similar upbringings in terms of education, in terms of holidays, and in terms of experiences. So we knew that we wanted something on a par or better for our children. So in terms of education, at the moment, we're paying the best part of $30,000 a month for education, including extracurricular. And then once you throw in things like football lessons, you throw in, a lot of people have bus timetables that cost an absolute fortune in Hong Kong because shifting vast quantities of kids all around for international schools can be very expensive. We don't have that expense, but I know that a lot of parents do. We also have a full-time helper so that we can have someone there to look after the kids when we can't be, and also to help around the management of their time, their schedules, and to providing food for them. And so that's an expense that people remember but may under budget for. And also, just simple things like if you want to book a holiday, you're not booking 2 cheap flights at the back of a plane, you're suddenly booking 4 flights. And once you start multiplying things, you're suddenly looking at, at the moment our kids will sleep in the same hotel room as us, but eventually we'll end up needing 2 hotel rooms, 4 flights, bigger cars, and all of those things. And that kind of just continues up as they get older. It costs about 4 million Hong Kong dollars to raise a child, and that caused outrage at the time because there was a lot of people who said, well, you don't need to do these things, you don't need to have all these costs, and that's a ridiculous amount of money. And I think that was just pure fear. That same bank has recently said that it probably costs closer to 6 million to bring up a child. Now, there are ways and means of making that cheaper, and there are ways and means of making that far more expensive. It depends on what levels you want and where you want to compromise and where you want to spend the money. But if you were to budget spending basically a couple of $1 million over their lifetime, you wouldn't be far wrong.
So really, I guess you said, what was it? They absorb every bit of available cash.
And so energy and space and time and love.
Of course, like with that in mind, though, that available cash bit, prioritization, yes. Budgeting, understanding your ingoings and outgoings. I know from speaking to you and to other people in the office, a lot of people come in and they actually have no concept of where or how they spend money.
It might be they have no concept. It might be that they hide from it. We all have a very different attitude to money. So the attitude to money, our financial personality, is based on our experience, the experience of our family, our friends, what we hear in the news, what we see. And it might be that we've known someone who's gone bankrupt. It might be that we know someone who's won the lottery. So it's a very emotive topic, and we tie a lot of our personality and a lot of our identity to the financial aspects of our lives. What you have is you have a couple when you slam those together, and then you have lots of different areas where it can be quite stressful to combine those two into a family. extrapolating that to your kids and saying, well, how do we want our kids to be brought up? What attitude do we want them to have about money is quite hard. But a lot of people who come in who don't know how much they are spending are putting their heads in the sand because it scares them, or they don't feel like they're in control. And it's easier to say, I don't know, than to say, I don't know and it scares me and I should know. So one of the things I do is I do sit down with clients and say, look, let's look at the big things. So how much is rent? How much is schooling? How much is your helper? How much are you spending on holidays? And we can then guesstimate how much they're actually spending. And if that sounds about right, they can then go away and double check their statements and say, that is how much we're spending. A lot of people go away and go, oh my goodness, I didn't take into consideration my very expensive dog that needed surgery. I didn't take into consideration the fact that we're spending money on my mother-in-law or your father-in-law or something. And so there's lots of different expenses that people overlook when they're looking at the minutiae of everyday life that if you look at on an annual grand scheme of things, they can add into that.
Something you said there, right? And I think I'll come back to something you said at the beginning there. You talked about two lives almost coming together.
Yes.
To form a family. So opposites attract. The old adage is often true. So I'm assuming you come to a situation where one person has a completely different attitude towards money than the other. How and what does that look like when you're trying to develop attitudes towards money for children?
I think communication is the key. You need to understand how you feel about money, and you need to be able to explain this to your partner. You need to be able to say, well, the reason that being in debt terrifies me is because of this family experience. The reason that I want to bury my head in the sand and spend a load of money on a credit card is this psychological experience. There's usually some kind of motivation around money, and having that open conversation and admitting your own foibles is quite a big part of understanding how you want your children to be brought up thinking about money.
Presumably there's a role to play for you as an advisor to sort of be that, I guess, mitigate those different attitudes, or
there really is. So
put a process in place.
It's one of those things where when a couple comes in and they have completely different viewpoints on money, it might be something they've never spoken about, or they spoke about at the beginning of their relationship, and because they had very different viewpoints and disagreed, they just didn't bother talking about that bit. And it's very easy to not have those deep conversations when you're worrying about whose play date's this and what's this and have you bought this and all of those different things that the everyday life consists of. But being in a financial advisory appointment, you kind of have all of those things stripped out, and you create the space to have those financial conversations that you may never have had before.
Makes sense. Let's bring it back to you a little bit. Like a lot of people, working mother.
Indeed.
Lots of women have in particular, career breaks, reduced working hours, take on more of the caring responsibility. I know you are very passionate about this indeed, but what is the financial impact of that, and do people underestimate it?
I think people very much underestimate the gap that is created by being female, basically. So there is an expectation that we'll take on the caring of children, the caring of parents, the everyday running of a household, the remembering of birthdays, the remembering of Christmas cards and presents. There's a lot that is sort of seen as a mum's role. I think that is changing as, I don't know whether men becoming more evolved or we're becoming more fierce at saying, get on with it. But I would say that most women who take a break forget about themselves. So women have a tendency to put ourselves at the bottom of our to-do list. And if you have money, most of us would rather spend it on our children than remember to put it into our retirement fund. And because of that, we end up with this position where we have a savings gap between us and our male counterparts, which leads to a retirement gap, which means that we end up retiring with a lot less money. But we also retire for a lot longer as we have a longer lifespan. So it means that we're setting ourselves up by not looking at our finances for a much more frugal old age than we could if we had actually thought about it much younger.
I think that's right. And you talked there about almost pillar to post, right?
Yeah.
The role of women being so broad, from having to work through taking on more of the caring responsibilities. We did some research 2 or 3 years ago around the sandwich generation.
Yeah.
So it's this concept that you've got women who are caring for children who are growing up and parents who are aging.
Yes.
And it's creating a situation where actually your finances are so stretched that you're spending here and spending there and almost forgetting about yourself.
Absolutely.
We found, I think it was 63% of Hong Kongers describe themselves as saving less for themselves because of these pressures.
Yeah.
How often do you see this, and how can someone like you help?
I think we see it a lot more. I am in my 40s. I think most people, sort of 40s, 50s and 60s, we're in a position where our parents are around. God willing, they are healthy. But when they're not healthy, we are looking at spending money on elderly care. We're looking at, and that could be as simple as someone going in and helping with cleaning, or it could be full care and actually an old age people's home. So parents have a sort of different level of care that they will need, and that evolves as they get older. So if you are hopefully in good health, it might be that your parents are able to live longer and have a much more exciting life for a lot longer. But there is always the potential to suddenly have to pay for these medical costs and these costs that you haven't necessarily expected. As expats, we also have the added guilt and added costs of saying, right, if I want to go and visit my mum who lives in a different country, it's not the case of popping in the car for half an hour. It's getting on a flight. It's taking the time off work. It's making sure that I can travel across the world to go and spend that time with my parent, and leaving the family behind to do that. And so it is an emotional and financial wrench, because what you're doing is you're splitting the finite resources that you have in terms of time and energy and effort and money between the younger generation and the older generation. And it's emotionally very tiring, I think.
I think it also brings out one of what I think is probably the biggest challenge that faces our industry, probably faces governments, probably faces society as a whole. People live longer. How on earth do you save for the amount of time that you're going to need to outside of working?
Yeah, it's not like, so in my grandparents' generation, you start work, you work for a company for 40 years, you get a gold watch, you go and sit in your allotment, 5 years later,
carriage clock.
Done. Now, more people are retiring in a more sort of partial way. So you might start to slow down in your 50s or 60s, but realistically, if you stop work at 60 and live to 100, that's a heck of a long time where you have got to provide money for yourself.
To your point, if you retire at 60, you might still have parents who are alive and have career costs, or children, if you've had them later, who are still at university.
Absolutely. And so one of the things that is quite the privilege of a financial advisor is to say, what if? So it's what do you want to be when you grow up? How do you want your life to be? What are your hopes and dreams, your ambitions for both you, your kids, your parents, and what do you want your life to look like? And then if we sort of go backwards from that, what do we do today to make sure that those things don't stay as dreams and they become the reality that you're living? And that is the great privilege, is being let into someone's hopes and dreams and being instrumental in creating the architecture around getting them to that position.
I like that way of phrasing it. So hopes and dreams.
Absolutely.
That's what it's all about.
It's a lot less about numbers than it is about people than a lot of people consider. And I've always found people infinitely fascinating. And so it's a great privilege doing this job.
Completely agree. And anytime we speak to clients, it's rarely numbers that people talk about. It's the home they bought. It's the retirement they had. I talked about IVF right at the beginning. It's the child they have, or whatever it is.
Very few people say, I would like to spend $4 million on my child. What they say is, I'd like my child to go to this school. I want them to go to this university. I want them to have the option to buy a property and be happy. You don't look at it in terms of money. You look at it in terms of experience, and you look at it in terms of the safety net and the confidence you give your children by being that financial backstop for them.
Safety net. Another very important part of your job, another important part of planning, another important part of being a parent. What are some of the things from a protection point of view that parents should be thinking about?
Well, the first step is always a will. So in Hong Kong, particularly for expats, setting up a will is very important, because the probate process can be incredibly long and quite arduous. The other thing is making sure that your children go to who you want. So if something were to happen to me and my husband, I want to know that my children will be picked up by my brother and looked after and nurtured and cared for, and he knows the life we wanted to build for our children and has the finances that we have provided through insurance to keep that going. So I'm in a very lucky position. I work in the insurance industry, I work in the finance industry. So Sean and I sat down and worked out how much we needed to be able to bring our children up, how much we needed to make sure that were something to happen to either of us, we would be financially secure. And that gives us both a level of confidence. The other thing that I think a lot of people overlook is having personal insurance. There are statistics where sort of people are 70% more confident if they have private insurance as opposed to just company insurance, because you know that you have control over that. The other thing is having critical illness cover. So I know that were I to get sick, I would have money to fall back on. That would mean that I wouldn't have to use my own savings and my own retirement plan and cash those in to deal with short-term medical expenses. What critical illness does is it provides you a lump sum where you to be sick to be able to use those, so that, touch wood, you get better. You don't suddenly have to work an extra 10 years because your health has used up the money that you had saved previously. I've had clients who've had cancers where they've ended up having to start again completely financially, and it puts their retirement back by 10, 15 years. And if you can find a way of doing that by paying a small amount to an insurance company and have the confidence that that won't happen to you, it really does help you sleep at night.
It's something about that psychologically where people won't mention it if they have it and never have to use it.
People don't want to talk about death. They don't want to talk about money.
It's the number one thing if they have to use it that they're thankful for having had.
I mean, I've had various surgeries for various parts of me. I'm very clumsy, and the medical insurance I have gives me a lot of confidence that if something were to happen to me, or if something were to happen to the kids, I know that they would be eligible to get some of the best medical treatment possible, and it wouldn't be financially detrimental to me and to our family.
Something completely different, but I think important as a parent, and as a parent within this industry, teaching children about money. When do you honestly believe they pick up financial habits? Are either of your children displaying any financial habits yet? Who do they take after?
Well, in most things, my oldest takes after my husband, and my youngest is unfortunately very similar to me and is slightly mad. So it's good fun. I would say, and there are statistics to back this up, that your spending habits are basically set by the time you're about 7. And so if that is the case, these are the crucial years where I can teach my children that you don't just spend money frivolously. The problem with that as a working mum is I tend to go home and spend money frivolously to make up for the fact that I'm at work all day. So I have to make a very conscious effort to say, look, this is the budget for what we're doing. So if we're going to go and get sweets, you tell me how you are going to spend this $20. Let's add up the numbers together and work out how much you're going to spend. And what I would like to do is then extrapolate that out to kind of go with, if we're going on this holiday, we've got 10 days in this place. Let's work out what we're going to do and how we're going to do it and what it's going to cost, and work out a budget around that, because it enables children to weigh up the pros and cons of different things and make a decision. So if you're weighing up going, I don't know, windsurfing versus going scuba diving, and you go, well, these are the prices, what is the benefit of doing this, and going through that, you're getting them to evaluate things financially and on a fun basis, to kind of go, I would prefer to do that twice than this once, and comparing things and enabling you to say, this is the pros and cons of this is the cost benefit analysis, means that when it comes to doing that much more later in life over bigger things, they're going into that with some level of experience.
Something I know you're passionate about, something I actually know St James's Place is passionate about, is financial education for children and developing good habits early on.
Absolutely.
Not to put pressure on you, financial advisor and mum, how are you doing this with your wee ones? How are you teaching them the habits? Who do they take after?
It is a constant struggle. My kids, we're very lucky. We have one that takes after daddy and one that takes after mummy. And so they both approach things very differently. But in terms of money, what we try and do is instill a sense of it's not an infinite resource. There is a limited amount. You have to work out, if you're going to spend $50 on snacks, what snacks are you going to buy? And can you buy more sweets instead of an ice cream, or if you're going to spend as much money on an ice cream, what does that mean in terms of cost benefit analysis? I will say that I'm not the best at this. I think that if you're a working mom, you have a tendency to overspend on your children to make up for the fact that you're not there. And I am absolutely guilty of this. I was on the ferry with Alex the other day, and I said to him, what do you want to go and do when we go home? Oh, I want to go and buy some sweets. I'll need a coin. And I said, okay, how many coins? I need 1 coin, and I will buy 1 teddy bear and 1 sweetie with it. Excellent. Where do you think?
Quite a big coin.
Yeah, well, apparently it's very good. And I said, and where do you think Mummy gets the money from? And his answer was, pirates give it to her so that she can go to the shop. So I'm not convinced I'm nailing parenting and teaching financial freedom, but it's a start. So talking about money is something that a lot of families never do. I think there is a sort of misconception that if you don't talk about money, then people will somehow pick it up by osmosis or somehow become financially educated in their own time. But I think the earlier you start with kids and the earlier you normalize talking about finances and cash and talking about why as a family you are doing something, the easier that becomes. So if you're talking about going on holiday and say, right, this is the budget for what we're going to do today. So we can go for dinner at this expensive restaurant or we can go to this cheap restaurant. And if we go to the cheap one, we can then go and do this. And if we go to the expensive one, we can't do that activity. We can do something cheaper. So it's looking at what do you want to do and what is the cost-benefit analysis of that. And it can be as simple as, do you want a sweet that's $10 or do you want 2 sweets that are $5? And looking at those things can give kids the vocabulary and the understanding around very basic analysis, which means that they're in a position when they have to do something a lot harder when they're older, where they've sort of started that journey. I think most nationalities and cultures have something similar. In Aesop's fable, when it's sort of the grasshopper that sings all summer versus the hardworking ant. I think there's a lot of different tales in every culture that is about basically preparing for the future and not just living for the moment. And those are very handy for explaining to kids that now is not always the time to spend everything or do everything. Having some level of waiting for the future and understanding some level of anticipation and the benefit of, let's prepare for this can be very, very good. At the moment, my eldest is learning about plans at school. So they're saying, well, how do you make a plan? So you make a plan by deciding what you want to do and then breaking it down into different bits. And then if something goes wrong, you can change the plan. So he was explaining this all, and you can change the plan, Mummy, and then you can make a new plan. And that is basically a life skill. It's working out what you want to do, breaking it down into sections, and as you go along, you can change the plan.
It is financial planning.
It's financial planning. It's life planning.
Yeah.
And the fact he's doing that at 5 is brilliant.
Thinking about this, that coming up with a plan, breaking it down into parts. I suspect, having not gone through myself, but I suspect there is an overwhelming element to becoming a parent, be that financial, emotional, that terrifying thought that you are that caretaker for that little life. How do you break that down, not get overwhelmed?
I think if you are trying to be a good parent, you will at some point be overwhelmed. It is an overwhelming responsibility. It's a joy, it's a privilege. It is all-consuming, and it will make you feel like you're drowning at some point. And I think that changes as they get older, whether you're holding a newborn thinking, good God, why don't we go to sleep? Or whether you're holding the hand of your child as they're preparing for university. There are always bits that are going to overwhelm you. But I think preparation and understanding that plans do change, understanding that you can prepare as much as you want, but life is never going to be exactly what you think it's going to be. And financially, mentally, physically, emotionally, you need to prepare for the unexpected. And financially, you do that through insurance, and emotionally, you do that by communication and education, and learning about yourself and how you react to things can mean that you're much more prepared for bumps along the road. Financially, there's always a want for it to be very smooth. I think people get very worried when there's volatility, but parenting and life and all of those things is about volatility. Yeah. Nothing is a smooth line. And if it was, frankly, it could be quite dull. And
change can sometimes be good, right?
Change can be good. Change can be fun. And as you watch these little people evolve from these tiny little, from these tiny little people into
or even more for you, from embryo to
I mean, Ollie is a fully functioning child with an opinion. Alex is speaking in full sentences. As they are evolving, you are learning how to be a parent in the way they're learning how to be a child. And so you are picking up on things. And it's very easy, much like with finances, to compare yourself to other people and feel like you're lacking. I think we always compare ourselves and kind of go, well, that child's reading first, that child's walking first. They look like they're richer than us. They look like they're more financially prepared. Their child is quieter, which always happens to us. And so comparing yourself with others when it comes to raising kids, when it comes to finance, it never psychologically helps.
No, and everyone compares themselves to someone else. You're thinking, oh, that child's quieter. The other parent's probably thinking, gosh, I wish they'd talk a little more, right? You know?
Absolutely.
I think there's definitely that. Like, don't compare yourself. I think that's very good practical advice. If we go back to practical advice, as a role, as a financial advisor, as a mother, 3 practical steps that you would offer a new parent from your experience as a financial advisor and as a mum.
I think the first step in being a parent is to calm down and realise it will all be all right. No matter what decisions you make for your child, they're probably fine. But in all reality, I think the first thing to do is have those conversations with your partner. Feel like you're on the same team. Feel like you are approaching it from, even if it's from very different backgrounds, from different cultures, and you're coming from different levels of financial understanding or financial maturity, you are going to be working as a team and you're on the same page. I think that takes a lot of the stress out of the situation by having that communication early on. Another thing that we found very helpful is getting the really boring stuff out of the way while you're pregnant. So while you're pregnant, you can do all these exciting things where, you know, you go and look at these ridiculous Lamborghini prams that you probably don't need. You look at all the different bits and bobs you're painting a nursery and all of those things. But doing the things that are quite dull that make you a grown-up, writing a will, making sure you have insurance, making sure that you have a birth plan that is financially viable, and making sure that you've had that conversation and that you are working together towards that, can really feel that it gives you a lot of confidence. And I think that having that plan, part of that is also making sure that you have money in the bank for emergencies, that you are making a financial plan for the future. And it all kind of comes into that conversation that what do we want this child to be and have, and how do we want to work together to get to that, and what is the plan to do that?
For somebody who's feeling perhaps a bit overwhelmed with the concept of it, how can you, in your role as a financial advisor, build a bit of clarity, a bit of security? What do you offer in that process?
The first thing I would say is if you're feeling overwhelmed, it's because you care. If you didn't care, you wouldn't feel overwhelmed. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, you're probably doing quite a good job. And breathe is one of the first things I would say. As a financial advisor, I sit down with parents all the time, and I sit down with young couples who are planning their future and say, right, what are your plans? Let's write them down. It's great to have these conversations, but having a plan and writing these things down can really feel like you're solidifying a plan and making it part of your ethos. What Sean and I do, which we find very handy, is once a year we sit down and we look at the achievements of the previous year and we work out what we want to achieve in the next year. And we look at that as a family, we look at that financially, we look at that as our career, and we look at it personally. And having those different areas covered is what I really go through with people when they say, what do I want my life to look like? So where do I want my kids to go to university? Where do I want to live when I retire? What are the things that are non-negotiable in how I want my children to be brought up, and how do we pay for those?
Eleanor, your top 3 practical tips that a new parent can take on day one.
I would say have a conversation with your partner and talk about the practicalities and the aspirations you have and how you want your parenting journey and your child's life to look. I would then say write those things down so that they're not a generic idea and they're more of a concrete plan. And then I would say speak to an expert. So someone like me can look at that plan and help you to financially prepare to make that plan a reality.
And of course, sleep when the baby sleeps.
Sleep if the baby sleeps.
If the baby sleeps.
Get as much sleep as you possibly can, then disappears for quite a while.
That makes sense. Look, I think we'll end it there. Cutting things down into small little steps, I think, is the most sensible way to do it. And one of the easiest first steps that you can take is to reach out and speak to an expert like Eleanor.
Absolutely.